Sarah Chen walked through the halls of the Galactic Defense Academy and felt small. The station was huge, bigger than any city she had ever seen back on Earth. Everything around her was made of metal that shined like mirrors. The walls curved up and away until they met the ceiling far above her head. Strange lights floated in the air without touching anything, casting purple and blue shadows on the floor. Other students moved past her in the hallway. Some had 4 arms, some had skin that looked like rocks. One group had bodies that seemed to be made of pure light, that flickered and danced as they talked. Sarah pulled her simple gray uniform closer to her body and tried not to stare. She was the only human at the academy, the only one from Earth. When the Galactic Council had offered her planet one spot in their most important military school, Sarah never thought they would pick her. She was just a farm girl from Montana who knew how to fix machines and work with her hands. But here she was, walking among the children of species that had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. The Advanced Plasma Weaponry classroom was on level 7. Sarah found it after getting lost twice and asking directions from a helpful student whose head looked like a giant flower. She slipped into the room just before class started and took a seat in the back row. The other students filled the space around her. She counted 12 different species, maybe more. Their voices made sounds like music, like grinding rocks, like wind through trees. None of them sounded quite human. Commander Zeltok walked to the front of the class. He was tall and thin, with smooth gray skin and 4 arms. His black eyes were bigger than human eyes and seemed to see everything at once. When he spoke, his voice was clear and cold. "Today we study plasma weapons," he said. "These tools channel pure energy into shapes that can cut through any known material. They require perfect control of electromagnetic fields. One mistake, and the energy will destroy the user." Sarah leaned forward in her seat. Back home, her grandfather had taught her to use a bullwhip to move cattle. The way Commander Zeltok described plasma weapons sounded similar, but with energy instead of leather. The commander moved to a table covered with different weapons. Some looked like swords made of light. Others were long and thin like ropes, but they glowed with inner fire. One weapon looked almost like a regular whip, except it flickered with blue and white energy. "The plasma whip is one of the most difficult weapons to master," Commander Zeltok continued. "It requires species with natural electromagnetic sensitivity. The Vorthak excel at this weapon because their crystal bodies conduct energy perfectly. The Luminari can use it because they are made of energy themselves." Sarah raised her hand. Around her, other students also raised hands, tentacles, and claws. Commander Zeltok looked around the room and pointed to several alien students. "Yes, you may try the basic models," he said to a group of Vorthak students. Their bodies were made of what looked like living crystal that caught and reflected the classroom lights. Sarah kept her hand raised. Commander Zeltok looked at her and his expression changed. His large eyes became narrow and his mouth turned down. "Human," he said, and the word sounded like an insult. "You will observe only. Your species lacks the neural pathways necessary for electromagnetic field manipulation. Attempting to use a plasma weapon would result in immediate death." Sarah felt her face grow hot. Around her, some of the alien students made sounds that might have been laughter. She lowered her hand and tried to stay calm. "But, Commander," she said, keeping her voice steady, "how do you know humans cannot use these weapons if no human has ever tried?" The classroom became very quiet. Commander Zeltok stared at her for a long moment. "Because, child, your species is new to the galaxy. You have no genetic modifications for energy manipulation. No natural electromagnetic sensitivity, no cybernetic enhancements. You are, as your files state, completely organic and unmodified. Such beings cannot survive contact with pure plasma." Sarah felt anger rise in her chest, but she pushed it down. She had learned long ago that getting mad did not solve problems. Instead, she watched as Commander Zeltok demonstrated the weapons with smooth, practiced movements. The plasma whip came alive in his hands. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Energy flowed along its length like liquid fire. When he cracked it through the air, it made a sound like thunder. Where it touched the metal practice targets, they melted like butter. "You see?" Commander Zeltok said as he powered down the weapon. "Perfect control is required. The energy must be guided by direct neural interface with electromagnetic fields. Without this ability, the plasma will follow the path of least resistance through the user's body, killing them instantly." Sarah nodded and took notes, but her mind was working. The way the commander moved the whip looked familiar. The stance, the wrist movement, the follow-through. It was like watching her grandfather work, except with energy instead of leather. When class ended, Sarah stayed in her seat as the other students filed out. Some of them looked at her with what might have been pity. Others ignored her completely. She was used to both reactions by now. As she gathered her things, Sarah heard her name called. She looked up to see Zakthor, one of the largest Vorthak students. His crystal body was deep blue and stood almost 3 meters tall. His face was angular and sharp, like carved stone. "Human," he said, and his voice sounded like rocks grinding together. "Do not feel bad about your limitations. Not every species can be warriors. Perhaps you are better suited to support roles. Maintenance, food preparation, something safe." Sarah looked up at him and smiled. It was the same smile she had used back home when the neighbor boys told her that girls could not handle cattle. "Thank you for the suggestion," she said politely. "I will keep it in mind." Zakthor seemed surprised by her calm response. He had probably expected her to be upset or angry. Instead, Sarah finished packing her books and walked out of the classroom with her head high. That night, Sarah lay in her small dormitory room and stared out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, looking like just another point of light. She thought about home, about the ranch, about her grandfather's patient hands, teaching her to work with tools and animals. Tomorrow would bring new classes and new challenges. She would continue to prove that humans belonged here, one day at a time, even if she had to do it from the back row, taking notes while others got to handle the real weapons. But Sarah Chen had not given up on anything in her entire life, and she was not about to start now. Somewhere in this vast galaxy of advanced species and impossible technologies, there had to be a place for someone who knew how to learn, how to adapt, and how to work with her hands. She just had to find it. The next week, Sarah walked into advanced plasma weaponry class and felt the same cold looks from her classmates. She had gotten used to being ignored or pitied, but today, something felt different. Zakthor and his group of Vorthak friends were talking in low voices and looking at her. Commander Zeltok began the lesson by bringing out more advanced weapons. These ones glowed brighter and made the air around them hum with energy. Sarah watched carefully as he demonstrated each one, taking notes on the movements and techniques. "Today, we will practice with live plasma weapons," Commander Zeltok announced. "Each student will have the chance to handle a basic plasma whip under careful supervision. Remember, these weapons are active. They can kill you if handled incorrectly." Sarah raised her hand again. This time, Commander Zeltok saw her but looked away without calling on her. He pointed to various alien students, who came forward one by one to try the weapons. The first student was a luminari named Bright Song of Morning. Her body was made of pure light that shifted from blue to white to gold as she moved. When she took the plasma whip, it seemed to blend with her natural energy. She moved it through the air in smooth circles, and the weapon responded like it was part of her body. Next came a Zephyrian student whose name sounded like clicking insects. His 6 arms allowed him to control the whip in complex patterns that would be impossible for other species. The plasma energy danced around him like living ribbon. Sarah watched each demonstration and noticed something interesting. Every species used the weapon differently, but they all relied on their natural abilities. The Luminari used their energy bodies. The Zephyrians used their multiple arms. The Vorthax students used their crystal bodies to conduct and amplify the electromagnetic fields. But under all the different techniques, Sarah saw the same basic movements her grandfather had taught her with a simple leather whip. The same wrist snap, the same follow-through, the same way of reading the tool's weight and balance. When it was Zakthor's turn, he stepped forward with confidence. His blue crystal body caught the classroom lights and threw them back in sharp flashes. He took the plasma whip from Commander Zeltok with obvious pride. "Watch and learn," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is how a true warrior handles plasma." Zakthor activated the weapon, and it came alive with crackling energy. The whip was longer than the ones the other students had used, and it glowed with fierce white light. He moved it through the air in complex patterns, creating shapes and spirals that left glowing trails. The display was impressive. Sarah had to admit that Zakthor had real skill. His crystal body seemed to amplify the weapon's power, making it brighter and more controlled than any of the previous demonstrations. When he cracked it through the air, the sound was like lightning striking. The other students made appreciative noises. Even Commander Zeltok nodded approval. Zakthor basked in the attention, making the whip dance in even more elaborate patterns. Then he stopped and looked directly at Sarah. His crystal face was hard to read, but his voice carried clear meaning. "Of course, not everyone can handle such weapons," he said. "Some species are simply not built for warfare. Perhaps the soft flesh would like to observe how a real warrior fights?" Sarah felt the familiar anger rise in her chest, but she kept her face calm. Around her, the other students turned to look. Some seemed uncomfortable with Zakthor's words. Others appeared curious to see how she would respond. "I am observing," Sarah said quietly. "That is what I was instructed to do." Zakthor's laugh sounded like breaking glass. "Yes, instruction. Very important for soft species. They must be told what they cannot do, or they might hurt themselves." Commander Zeltok watched the exchange, but said nothing. Sarah noticed that he did not tell Zakthor to stop or focus on the lesson. If anything, the commander seemed interested to see what would happen. Zakthor moved closer to Sarah's seat, still holding the active plasma whip. The weapon hummed with dangerous energy, casting moving shadows on the walls. "Tell me, human," Zakthor continued, "have you ever seen a real weapon before? Or do your people still use primitive tools like stones and sticks?" Sarah thought about the ranch back home, about the tools she used every day to work with animals that could kill her if she made mistakes, about the respect required to handle powerful equipment safely. "We use tools that work," she said simply. Zakthor laughed again. "Tools that work. How quaint. But what about tools that could vaporize you instantly? What about weapons that channel the power of stars?" He held up the plasma whip, letting its energy flicker and dance. The weapon was beautiful and terrifying, like holding lightning in your hand. "This weapon," Zakthor said, "requires perfect harmony between user and tool. It demands electromagnetic sensitivity that takes thousands of years to evolve. It needs neural pathways that your primitive brain simply does not possess." Sarah looked at the weapon and tried to see past the energy effects to the underlying structure. It was a tool, like any other tool. It had weight, balance, and physics that governed how it moved. "Perhaps," Zakthor said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge, "the human would like to try, unless of course you are too frightened." The classroom became completely silent. Every student turned to stare at Sarah. Even Commander Zeltok stepped closer, his forearms tense with attention. Sarah knew this was a trap. She understood that Zakthor was trying to humiliate her, maybe even get her hurt. According to everything she had been taught, touching an active plasma weapon would kill her instantly. But Sarah also knew something that none of them understood. She had been working with dangerous tools her entire life. She had learned to read animals that could crush her with one kick. She had fixed machinery that could tear her apart if she made a mistake. Most importantly, she had learned that tools were tools, regardless of how advanced they looked. Sarah stood up slowly and walked toward Zakthor. The other students pressed back in their seats, some making worried sounds in their own languages. Commander Zeltok raised one hand as if to stop her, then paused. "Are you sure about this challenge?" Sarah asked Zakthor quietly. "Because if I try that weapon and something unexpected happens, you will be responsible for the consequences." Zakthor's crystal face showed surprise at her calm tone. He had expected fear, anger, or refusal. Instead, Sarah looked at him with the same steady expression she used when evaluating a difficult animal or a broken piece of equipment. "I am sure," Zakthor said, though some of his confidence seemed to waver. "Unless you wish to admit that humans are too weak for real weapons." Sarah looked at the plasma whip in his hands. The energy danced and flickered along its length like living fire. Everyone in the room believed it would kill her if she touched it. Maybe they were right. But Sarah had spent her whole life being told what she could not do, and she had spent her whole life proving those people wrong. "All right," she said simply. "I will try your weapon." The room exploded in shocked voices as Zakthor slowly extended the plasma whip toward her. Commander Zeltok stepped forward as if to intervene, then stopped and watched with the same fascination as his students. Sarah reached out her hand toward the crackling energy weapon, and the entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Sarah looked at the plasma whip in Zakthor's hand and felt surprisingly calm. The weapon crackled with energy that should have terrified her, but instead she found herself studying it like any other tool she had been asked to use. The handle was about 2 feet long and made of some kind of metal that hummed with power. Energy flowed from it in a line about 6 feet long, flickering between white and blue. It moved slightly in the air like a snake made of lightning. "Last chance to back down, human," Zakthor said. His voice was confident, but Sarah noticed that his crystal hand was gripping the weapon very tightly. Sarah did not answer. Instead, she stepped closer and examined the whip more carefully. The energy looked chaotic, but she could see patterns in how it moved. There was weight to it, even though it was made of pure energy. It had balance and momentum, just like the leather whips she had used back home. The other students pressed back in their seats. A few of them were making worried sounds in their own languages. One of the Luminari students pulsed with nervous yellow light. "Sarah," Commander Zeltok said suddenly, "I must advise against this action. Contact with plasma energy will cause immediate and fatal burns to unprotected organic tissue." Sarah looked at him and nodded. "I understand the risk, sir, but I think there might be things about humans that we do not know yet." She reached out and took the handle of the plasma whip from Zakthor's shocked grasp. The moment her fingers closed around the metal, Sarah felt the weapon come alive in her hand. Energy flowed up her arm like warm electricity. It did not burn or hurt. Instead, it felt familiar, like picking up a tool she had used many times before. The entire classroom gasped. Several alien students recoiled so far they fell out of their chairs. Zakthor's crystal body flickered with what might have been fear. But Sarah was not burning. She was not screaming. She was not dying. Instead, she lifted the plasma whip and felt its weight and balance. The energy moved with her movements, responding to small changes in her wrist and arm. It was heavier than a leather whip, but lighter than some of the electric tools she had used on the ranch. "Impossible," Commander Zeltok whispered. His 4 arms hung at his sides, like he had forgotten how to move. Sarah ignored him and focused on the weapon. She could feel the energy flowing through it, but her body was not conducting it the way everyone expected. Instead, the energy seemed to follow channels in her nervous system, moving along pathways that felt natural and safe. She raised her arm and made a small test movement, just a gentle flick of her wrist. The plasma whip responded perfectly, curving through the air in a smooth arc. The energy left a glowing trail that faded after a few seconds. "How?" Zach Thor asked. His voice sounded smaller than before. Sarah did not answer immediately. She was too busy feeling the weapon and learning how it moved. The physics were different from a regular whip, but the basic principles were the same. She needed to work with the tool, not against it. She took a step back to give herself room and made a larger movement. The plasma whip flowed through the air like liquid lightning. When she snapped her wrist at the end of the motion, the weapon cracked through the air with a sound like thunder. Every student in the room jumped. Some of them made sounds that were probably screams in their own languages. But Sarah was just getting started. She shifted her grip slightly and tried a different movement, one her grandfather had taught her for working with stubborn cattle. The plasma whip responded beautifully, curving in a tight circle before straightening out with another sharp crack. "This is actually easier than I expected," Sarah said, half to herself. The energy weapon felt good in her hands, balanced and responsive. Then she did something that made every alien in the room question everything they thought they knew about physics. Sarah wrapped the plasma whip around her arm. The energy that should have instantly vaporized human flesh instead coiled around her forearm like rope. Sarah's work-worn skin, toughened by years of manual labor, somehow interfaced with the plasma in a way that no scientific instrument had ever recorded. The weapon's energy flowed around her arm in bright spirals, but her skin remained unburned. She could feel the power, but it felt warm and controlled rather than dangerous. Several students actually fainted. A Zephyrian in the front row made a sound like a broken mechanical device. Commander Zeltok stared at Sarah with his mouth open, which was apparently something his species only did in extreme shock. Sarah looked down at the plasma energy wrapped around her arm and nodded in satisfaction. This was exactly like the technique her grandfather had shown her for controlling a whip quickly in tight spaces. Then, with a casual flick of her wrist that she had practiced 10,000 times with leather whips, Sarah unwrapped the plasma weapon and cracked it through the air. The sound was enormous. The energy whip moved faster than anything the aliens had ever seen, creating a sharp report that echoed through the metal classroom like a gunshot. In the silence that followed, Sarah lowered the weapon and looked around the room. Every face that was capable of showing expression displayed complete shock. The energy-based students were flickering wildly with what she guessed was confusion. "You know," Sarah said conversationally, "this reminds me of working cattle back home. Different energy source, same basic technique." Zakthor's crystal body was flickering between different colors, which Sarah had learned meant he was experiencing strong emotions. That should be impossible," he stammered. "No organic being can survive direct contact with concentrated plasma." Sarah looked at the weapon in her hand, then at Zakthor, then back at the weapon. "Well," she said reasonably, "maybe your information about organic beings is incomplete." Commander Zeltok finally found his voice. "Student Chen," he said slowly, "please deactivate the weapon and return it to the storage case immediately." Sarah nodded and looked for the power control. It took her a moment to find it since it was designed for alien hands, but she managed to shut down the plasma whip without any problem. The energy faded away, leaving just the metal handle. She walked over and placed the weapon carefully in its storage case, then returned to her seat. The other students watched her move like she was some kind of dangerous predator. As she sat down and opened her notebook to take more notes, Sarah noticed that everyone was still staring at her. The room was completely silent, except for the humming of the station's life support systems. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked politely. Commander Zeltok opened and closed his mouth several times before managing to speak. "Class is dismissed," he said finally. "All students report to your dormitories immediately. No discussion of today's events until further notice." The alien students filed out of the room in complete silence. Many of them kept looking back at Sarah as they left, like they expected her to burst into flames or transform into something else. Zach Thor was the last to leave. He stopped beside Sarah's desk and looked down at her with an expression she could not read. "Human," he said quietly. "What are you?" Sarah looked up at him and gave the same honest answer she always gave. "I am someone who knows how to work with tools." After he left, Sarah sat alone in the empty classroom and thought about what had just happened. She was pretty sure she had just changed everything, though she was not entirely certain how. Back home, when something impossible happened, her grandfather always said the same thing. Sometimes the impossible just means we do not understand the possible yet. Sarah gathered her books and headed back to her dormitory. She had a feeling that tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day. Sarah woke up the next morning to find 3 security guards outside her door. They were not human guards. One was a tall Vorthak with silver crystal skin. Another was covered in what looked like metal scales. The third was some species she had never seen before, with too many eyes and arms that bent in directions that made her dizzy to watch. "Student Chen," the Vorthak guard said in a voice like grinding stone. "You will come with us immediately." Sarah got dressed quickly and followed them through the station corridors. Other students stopped and stared as she passed. Word of what had happened in class had clearly spread, despite Commander Zeltok's orders not to discuss it. The guards led her to a part of the station she had never seen before. The hallways here were wider, and the walls were covered with screens showing data that scrolled too fast for her to read. They stopped at a door marked with symbols in several different alien languages. Inside was a room full of beings that Sarah recognized as important. She could tell by the way they moved and the way the guards treated them. There were representatives from several different species, all sitting around a curved table that seemed to be made of the same material as the station walls. At the head of the table sat someone who could only be the academy director. She was tall and thin, with skin that looked like polished metal and eyes that glowed with soft blue light. When she spoke, her voice was clear and precise. "Student Chen," the director said, "please take a seat. We have many questions." Sarah sat in the chair they indicated and waited. She had learned long ago that when authority figures wanted to talk to you, it was usually best to let them talk first and find out what they actually wanted to know. "Yesterday," the director continued, "you performed an action that our scientists tell us is impossible. You successfully handled an active plasma weapon without any protective equipment or genetic modifications. Can you explain how this occurred?" Sarah thought about the question carefully. "I picked it up and used it like any other tool," she said. "It was not as different from tools I have used before as everyone seems to think." A being that looked like a walking tree leaned forward. "Young human, do you understand what plasma is? It is matter heated to millions of degrees. It should have destroyed your organic tissue instantly." "But it did not," Sarah pointed out reasonably. "So either your understanding of plasma is wrong, or your understanding of humans is wrong." The tree being made a sound like rustling leaves, which might have been laughter. "Perhaps both," he said. The director activated a screen that showed Sarah's medical scan data. "We took the liberty of scanning you while you slept," she said. "I hope you do not mind. What we found is unusual." The screen showed Sarah's body in cross-section, highlighting her nervous system. But instead of the simple network that human medical texts showed, Sarah's scan displayed something much more complex. Her nervous system glowed with patterns that looked almost like the electromagnetic fields generated by plasma weapons. "Your neural pathways," the director explained, "are unlike anything in our medical databases. They appear to be naturally adapted for electromagnetic field manipulation, but in a way we have never seen before. A small being with multiple tentacles spoke up. The question is whether this adaptation is unique to you or common to your species. Sarah studied the scan data. I do not know, she said honestly. No human has ever been tested for this before. That, said the director, is what we intend to find out. We are sending a research team to your homeworld immediately, with your permission. Of course. Sarah nodded. She was curious about the answer herself. Over the next few hours, they ran more tests. Sarah handled different types of plasma weapons, each one supposedly more dangerous than the last. Every time, the weapon responded to her control like it was designed for human use. The scientists took notes and made excited sounds in their various languages. Sarah noticed that they stopped treating her like a student and started treating her like a puzzle they desperately wanted to solve. The neural adaptation is remarkable, one researcher told the director. But there is something else. Watch how she moves. They played back recordings of Sarah using the plasma weapons. On the screen, she looked calm and confident, handling tools that should have been impossible for her species. Notice the stance, the researcher continued. The grip, the way she distributes weight and controls the weapon's momentum. This is not beginner's luck. This is trained muscle memory. The director looked at Sarah with new interest. You said these weapons reminded you of tools from your home. Can you explain what you meant? Sarah thought about how to describe ranch work to beings who had probably never seen an animal larger than themselves. On Earth, we use tools called whips to direct livestock. They are made of leather instead of energy. But the physics are similar. You have to read the tool's weight and balance. You have to work with it, not against it. And you learned these techniques as a child? The director asked. Yes, ma'am. My grandfather taught me when I was 8 years old. He said that anyone could learn to use tools properly if they paid attention and practiced. The room became quiet. Sarah could tell that she had said something important, but she was not sure what. Finally, the tree being spoke. For most species, tool use is instinctive but limited. We evolved specific abilities for specific environments. But humans appear to have evolved general tool mastery. Another researcher, this one looking like a giant insect, clicked his mandibles excitedly. That would explain the neural adaptations, not evolved for specific electromagnetic sensitivity, but evolved for adaptive tool interface. Sarah listened to them discuss her brain like it was a machine they were trying to understand. It was interesting, but also a little strange to hear herself talked about like a science experiment. If this adaptation is common to humans, the director said slowly, it changes everything we thought we knew about your species. You were classified as a Class C species, suitable for basic support roles only. But if humans can naturally interface with advanced weapons technology... She did not finish the sentence, but Sarah could guess what she was thinking. Back home, people who could use tools effectively were valuable. In a galaxy full of advanced weapons and technology, humans who could master any tool they touched would be very valuable indeed. There is something else, Sarah said quietly. I do not think this is just about weapons. Everyone in the room looked at her. Back home, I work with animals and machines and all kinds of equipment. I have always been able to figure out how things work, even if I have never seen them before. I thought everyone could do that. But watching other students here, maybe they cannot? The researchers looked at each other with excitement. Sarah had the feeling that she had just given them a much bigger puzzle to solve. Student Chen, the director said, I think your education at this academy is about to change significantly. Instead of attending classes, you will be working with our research team to help us understand human capabilities. Is this acceptable to you? Sarah thought about it. She had come here to learn about the galaxy and earn her place among the stars. It looked like she was going to do both, just not in the way she had expected. Yes, ma'am, she said. That sounds interesting. As the meeting ended, and the guards prepared to escort her back to her quarters, the director stopped her with one final question. Student Chen, what do you think your grandfather would say about all this? Sarah smiled, remembering the old man who had taught her that any tool could be mastered with patience and practice. He would say that the impossible just means we do not understand the possible yet. The director's glowing eyes flickered with what might have been amusement. I believe your grandfather was a very wise human. As Sarah walked back through the station corridors, she noticed that other students no longer stared at her with pity or dismissal. Now they looked at her with something that might have been respect, or curiosity, or maybe even fear. Sarah Chen was no longer the weak human who did not belong at the Galactic Defense Academy. She was something new, something unprecedented. She was the first human to show the galaxy what her species was really capable of, and that was just the beginning. 6 months later, Sarah stood in front of the Advanced Combat Training Center and watched a group of new cadets practice with plasma weapons. Half of them were human. The research team's trip to Earth had confirmed what everyone suspected. Humans possessed a unique neural adaptation that allowed them to interface with almost any tool or technology. It was not magic, and it was not special genetics. It was the result of millions of years of evolution that had favored beings who could adapt to new environments and master new tools quickly. Earth's diverse environments had created a species that was not specialized for any one thing, but could learn to excel at everything. What the galaxy had seen as primitive adaptability was actually humanity's greatest strength. The news had spread through known space like wildfire. Within weeks, the Galactic Council had reclassified humans from Class C support species to Class A strategic partners. Earth went from being a backwater planet to one of the most important worlds in the galaxy. Sarah had become something she never expected, a teacher. Remember, she called out to the practice group, the weapon is not fighting against you. It wants to work with you. You just have to listen to what it is telling you. One of the human cadets, a boy named Marcus from the Earth colony on New Austin, was struggling with a basic plasma sword. The energy blade kept flickering and dying every time he tried to use it. Sarah walked over to him and watched his technique. What are you thinking about while you hold it? She asked. Marcus looked frustrated. I am trying to control the electromagnetic field like they taught us in theory class, but I cannot feel the energy patterns the way the Vorthak students can. Stop trying to be a Vorthak, Sarah said gently. You are human. Use human techniques. She took the weapon from his hands and activated it. The energy blade sprang to life with a soft hum. Back home, did you ever use power tools? She asked. Marcus nodded. My family runs a mining operation. I have been using plasma cutters since I was 10. Good. This is just a plasma cutter with a different shape. Feel the weight. Feel how the energy wants to move. Work with it instead of trying to force it. She handed the weapon back to Marcus. This time, when he activated it, the blade stayed solid and bright. He moved it through the air with growing confidence, and Sarah could see the moment when everything clicked for him. It is just like the cutters back home, he said with wonder. Different tool, same basic idea. Exactly, Sarah said. Tools are tools, no matter how fancy they look. She moved on to help the other students, both human and alien. The academy had changed its teaching methods based on what they had learned about human capabilities. Instead of teaching species-specific techniques, they now focused on fundamental principles that could be adapted by anyone. The results were impressive. Human cadets were graduating at the top of their classes in weapons training, engineering, and tactical planning. But more importantly, the mixed species classes were performing better than anyone had expected. Humans were teaching aliens to think about tools in new ways, while aliens were teaching humans about the advanced science behind their techniques. After practice, Sarah walked to her new office in the Academy's research wing. The hallways that had once felt alien and intimidating now felt like home. She knew every corridor, every turn, every shortcut through the massive station. Her office had a window that looked out at the stars. Sometimes she would sit there and think about how much had changed since that first day in advanced plasma weaponry class. Earth was now home to 12 Academy branch campuses. Human engineers were working with alien scientists to develop new technologies. Human soldiers were serving alongside alien warriors in the Galactic Defense Force. But the biggest change was not in technology or politics. It was in how the galaxy thought about advancement and capability. There was a knock on her door. Sarah looked up to see Zakthor standing in the doorway. The big Vorthak had changed over the past months. His crystal body still gleamed blue, but his attitude was completely different. "Commander Chen," he said formally. Sarah had been promoted to instructor rank after her research work was completed. "Just Sarah is fine," she said, gesturing for him to come in. "What can I do for you?" Zakthor sat in the chair across from her desk. "I wanted to speak with you before I graduate next week." "You have done excellent work," Sarah said honestly. Zakthor had become one of her best students once he stopped trying to prove his superiority and started focusing on learning. "I owe you an apology," Zakthor said quietly. "When you first arrived, I believed that humans were inferior. I thought that advanced technology required advanced evolution. I was wrong." Sarah nodded. "We were all learning. I did not understand your species either at first." "You showed me something important," Zakthor continued. "True strength is not about having the right genetics or the right technology. It is about being willing to learn and adapt." "My grandfather used to say something similar," Sarah said. "He told me that the strongest person is not the one who never falls down, but the one who gets back up every time." Zakthor's crystal face showed what might have been a smile. "I would like to meet this grandfather of yours someday." "He would like that," Sarah said. "He always enjoyed talking to people who work with their hands." After Zakthor left, Sarah returned to looking out her window at the stars. Somewhere out there, human ships were exploring new worlds and making contact with new species. Earth's children were spreading through the galaxy, not as conquerors, but as partners and teachers. The Academy had adopted a new motto based on something Sarah had said during her first interview with the director. It was inscribed on the wall of every classroom in both Galactic Standard and several Earth languages. "Tools are tools. Mastery comes from understanding, adaptation, and the willingness to learn." But Sarah's favorite change was smaller and more personal. In the advanced plasma weaponry classroom, there was a new display case. Inside it was a simple leather whip, the kind used by ranchers on Earth for hundreds of years. The plaque beside it read, "Sometimes the most advanced technology is built on the most fundamental principles." Sarah gathered her papers and prepared to leave for the day. Tomorrow she would be teaching a new group of cadets, both human and alien, how to work together with tools that their grandparents could never have imagined. As she walked through the station corridors toward her quarters, Sarah passed a group of young cadets arguing about homework in a mixture of human languages and alien communication patterns. They worked together naturally, sharing different perspectives and techniques without thinking about species barriers. This was what she was most proud of. Not the recognition or the promotions or the changes in galactic policy, but these everyday moments when beings from across the galaxy treated each other as partners and friends. Sarah had come to the Academy as the only human among aliens, feeling small and out of place. Now she was part of something bigger than any one species or world. She was part of a galaxy that was learning to see strength in differences and wisdom in new perspectives. Her grandfather had been right. The impossible just meant they had not understood the possible yet. and Sarah had a feeling that the galaxy was just beginning to understand what was possible when different species worked together, each contributing their own unique strengths to solve problems that none of them could handle alone. Outside her quarters window, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, unchanged by all the discoveries and revelations of the past months. But among those stars, on countless worlds, beings who had never heard of Earth were learning new ways to use tools, new ways to adapt to challenges, and new ways to see potential in the unexpected. Sarah Chen, the farm girl from Montana, who had once felt like the weakest person in the room, had helped change how an entire galaxy thought about strength and capability. And that, she thought as she settled down to sleep, was a pretty good day's work.